My name is Sergeant Mara Reyes, and I have been carrying a weapon since I was 19 years old. That is not a boast. It is simply a fact, the way it is a fact that I have brown eyes, or that I grew up in a small town in New Mexico, where the desert wind blew red dust through the window screens every summer evening. The weapon became part of me the same way the desert did, quietly, over time, until I stopped noticing it was there. It sat on my hip, the way a hand sits at the end of an arm. Natural, expected, mine. I want you to understand that before I tell you the rest of this story, because what happened in Training Bay 7 on Station Vethoron was not something I planned. It was not something I decided. It was something my body did, the way a knee rises when a doctor taps it with a small hammer. Pure reflex, old reflex, the kind that gets written into your nervous system not in one lifetime, but across thousands of them. I was assigned to the Interspecies Combat Training Division 8 months into the Galactic Cooperative's new integration program. The idea behind the program was simple enough. Bring soldiers from different species together, put them through shared exercises, and teach everyone to fight alongside each other, instead of against each other. Noble goal, difficult execution. The cooperative had 43 member species, and humans were the newest addition by a wide margin. There were 12 of us on Station Vethoron, 12 humans among 900 cadets from across the known galaxy. We were, by most measurements, the smallest delegation. We were also, by general consensus, the strangest one. The aliens were not unkind about it. They were curious, fascinated even, the way a scientist is fascinated by something unusual under a microscope. They asked questions about our planet, our history, our biology, our wars. Especially our wars. Every species in the cooperative had a military history, but most of them had stopped fighting each other centuries ago, after the founding accords brought everyone to the same table. For them, warfare had become theoretical. Something studied in academies, preserved in records, practiced in simulations. For us, it was Tuesday. We brought that with us. You could see it in the way we stood, the way we watched doorways when we entered rooms, the way our eyes moved in patterns that the other cadets noticed without being able to name. One of the Pelkesh cadets told me once, in careful translated words, that watching a group of humans walk through the station felt different from watching any other species. She said we moved like we were always expecting something to happen. I told her that was more or less accurate. She found that deeply interesting and slightly alarming, which seemed like a reasonable response. The Vothrani were the most prominent military species in the cooperative. They stood close to 7 feet tall, with layered exoskeletons in colors that shifted from copper to dark green depending on the light, and 4 upper limbs that ended in broad, flat hands. They were impressive to look at. They knew they were impressive to look at. Their history included something like 300 years of near-continuous military dominance before the Accords, and they carried that history the way some people carry old trophies, displayed prominently, polished regularly. Their cadet, Thresh Anukai, was one of the loudest personalities in the training division. Not aggressive exactly, more like a person who has never been told that a room has a volume limit. He had a wide social circle, a talent for languages, and a habit of testing people to see where their edges were. He was not a bad person. I want to be clear about that too. He was curious, and social, and occasionally careless, which is a combination that tends to cause problems in environments where the rules are still being written. He had taken an interest in the humans from the beginning. He asked questions. He challenged us to physical comparisons that he expected to win, and was genuinely surprised when he did not always win them. He made comments, never cruel ones, but comments that sat in a particular space between observation and mockery. The kind that make a room laugh and leave the subject deciding whether it is worth the effort to respond. I had decided, mostly, that it was not worth the effort. Until the morning of the integration exercise. It was a routine session, mixed species teams, seated across large tables in Training Bay 7, working through a joint tactical scenario on shared display screens. The exercise was designed to test communication across language barriers. Everyone was in standard training gear. I was seated at the far end of my table, 2 Marathi cadets to my left, a Pelkesh cadet across from me, and Thresh Anukai 3 seats to my right. My sidearm was on my hip. It was always on my hip, a standard pulse pistol, 11 years old, carried through 4 deployments, and more training exercises than I could count. I had cleaned it so many times that I could tell by feel alone whether the charge cells were seated correctly. It was not a symbol. It was not a prop. It was a tool that I had used in real situations, in real danger, and my hands knew it the way a musician's hands know their instrument, not by thinking, but by being. The exercise was about halfway through when I heard laughter from Thresh Anakai's end of the table. I looked up. He was holding my sidearm. He had reached across the empty seat between us, released the safety clasp on my holster, and lifted the weapon out while I was looking at a screen. He held it up over his head, grinning at 2 of his companions across the table. His translator badge produced something that meant, roughly, that he wanted to know if the small human needed her comfort item returned. The room laughed. I know what happened next, because I reviewed the training bay footage afterward, frame by frame, at the tribunal. It took me 0.3 seconds from the moment I registered the weight leaving my hip. My left hand closed around his wrist. My body turned. My right hand found his throat, the specific point at the front of his neck where the main airway sat, just above where the exoskeleton gave way to softer material, and I had him bent backward over the table before the sound of the laughter had finished traveling across the room. My weapon was back in my holster. My thumb was resting on the safety. His airway was compressed just enough to be uncomfortable, not enough to cause real harm, enough to stop. I held that position for 4 seconds. Then I let go, stepped back, put both hands at my sides and stood straight. His face, the parts of it that could show expression, showed something I had not expected. Not fear, not pain, confusion. Pure, complete, baffled confusion. He was a being from a species that had spent centuries at the top of the military hierarchy of the known galaxy, and his brain had simply not finished writing the program for what had just occurred. Something smaller than him had controlled him entirely for 4 seconds, and it had happened so fast that he had not been able to form a response. The room was silent. Not the silence of shock, though there was shock in it. The silence of recalibration. 900 years of interspecies peace had made these beings excellent at many things. It had not made them fluent in the particular quiet that follows when something reminds a room full of soldiers what soldiers actually are. I looked at Thresh Anukai. I said, in a level voice, that in human military culture, reaching for another soldier's weapon without permission was one of the most serious violations one person could commit against another. Not because of rules written in a manual, because of something much older than manuals. Then I sat back down and returned to my screen. The next 72 hours were, in bureaucratic terms, extremely busy. I was pulled from training and placed in temporary administrative hold. There were meetings, there were translation sessions. There were representatives from 3 different species relations offices sitting around a table looking at footage on a screen and discussing whether what I had done constituted assault, whether the provocation was relevant, and whether humans should be permitted to carry live configured weapons during integration exercises. Thresh Anukai had a bruised larynx, nothing serious, nothing that would not heal inside a week. But it was enough to make the situation official. I sat through all of it with my hands folded on the table. I answered every question directly and completely. I told them what I had told Thresh Anukai in the training bay, in more formal language. I said that the reflex that had produced my response was not a malfunction, and I would not describe it as one. I said that it was the result of species-level experience with conflict that existed in my nervous system below the level of conscious decision. I said that I was genuinely sorry for the physical injury, and I meant that, and I was not sorry for the reflex itself, and I meant that too. One of the tribunal members, a senior Pelkesh officer with a long history in cooperative arbitration, asked me to explain what I meant by species-level experience. I thought about how to answer that for a moment. Then I said that humans had been at war with each other, and with our environment, and with everything that wanted to hurt us, for the entire length of our existence. That we had never had the luxury of forgetting what danger felt like, because danger had never stopped being present long enough for us to forget it. That every generation of humans had handed something to the next generation, not in books, not in lectures, but in the body itself, in the way we startle, in the way we wake at strange sounds, in the way a hand that has carried a weapon for 11 years knows, without the brain being consulted, that the weapon is gone. The room was quiet when I finished. Then Thresh Anakai, who had been sitting at the far end of the table with a cooling compress against his neck, spoke. His translator badge processed his words, and what came out in my earpiece was this. He said that he had not understood that the weapon was a part of me. He said that, in his understanding, an object in a holster was an object. He said that he had believed the humans were performing seriousness about weapons, the way young cadets sometimes perform seriousness about things they want to seem important about. He said that he had not understood, before that morning, that there was a difference between performing something and being it. He said he was sorry for taking it. I looked at him across the length of the table. I told him I accepted that. The tribunal closed the matter 2 days later, with a formal note in my record, and a recommendation that integration training protocols be updated to include explicit briefings on human weapon handling culture. No punitive action, no removal from the program. Thresh Anakai returned to training with a slightly hoarse voice and a very different way of entering a room. The weeks that followed were different. Not dramatically different. Not in ways that showed up in official reports or training scores, but different in the texture of daily life on Vetheran, in the small adjustments that people make when something has shifted their understanding of the world. The cadets asked before touching things near me. Not just near me, near any of the 12 humans. They asked in the careful, deliberate way that people ask when they have recently learned that a question is necessary. Some of them asked directly. Others simply waited and watched and let the humans move first. Several cadets came to me privately, in the days and weeks after, with questions that they had clearly been sitting with for some time. They wanted to know about human reflex training, about how we practice staying calm under pressure, about what it felt like to carry the awareness of danger as a background condition rather than an emergency state. Some of them came purely out of professional curiosity. Some of them seemed to be working through something larger, a recognition that the peace they had grown up in, the peace they were proud of, had cost them something specific, a kind of fluency, a physical knowledge that their grandparents' had possessed, and that had been slowly, quietly bred out of them, across the long and fortunate years. I answered every question honestly. Thresh Anakai came to me on a Tuesday morning, 5 weeks after the incident, while I was running through weapon maintenance drills on my own, in one of the smaller practice bays. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching. Then he asked if I would be willing to teach him. Not the specific technique, he said. The condition, the readiness, the quality of being present in his body, the way I was present in mine. I looked at him for a long moment. He was, I decided, asking the right question. I told him to drop and give me 20. He did not know what that meant, so I showed him. Got down on the floor and demonstrated a push-up, counted 1, looked at him. He folded his forearms and lowered his large frame toward the floor with the careful concentration of a being attempting something for the first time. He made it to 11 before his form collapsed. He looked up at me from the floor with something close to indignation. I told him that was a fine start. I told him we would do this every morning. I told him that this was where it begins. Not in strategy rooms, not in simulation pods, not in the clean language of tactical theory. It begins in the body. It begins in the repetition. It begins in the quiet daily practice of knowing exactly where you are, in space, in time, in relation to everything around you. He nodded, slowly, and got back into position. He made it to 15 the next morning, 18 the morning after that. By the 4th week, he was asking better questions than most of the human cadets I had trained back home. I did not tell him that, but I noted it. They had called us primitives when we first arrived, in the careful, polite way that advanced civilizations call younger ones primitive, with sympathy, with academic interest, with the gentle confidence of species who believe that evolution only moves in one direction, toward softness, toward peace, toward the quiet rooms of progress. What they had not considered was that softness has a cost, that peace, however beautiful, however worth having, files away certain edges that took 10,000 years to sharpen. That there is a difference between a soldier who has studied war and a soldier who carries it in every tendon and reflex and quiet early morning habit of their body. They were not wrong to want peace. Peace is the goal. Peace is what all of it is for. But somewhere in the long, fortunate, peaceful years, they had forgotten what it felt like to have something worth protecting, and to have a body that had never, not once, been allowed to forget it. We had not forgotten. We carried it with us, in our holsters, in our hands, in the 0.3 seconds that change a room. That is what we brought to Veteran. That is what we have always brought, to every table, in every room, on every world, patient enough to let us sit down. We brought the memory of the long way here,